Hello everyone, welcome to our audiobook channel. If you enjoy this story or want to hear more exciting content, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Your feedback helps us improve and bring even more captivating stories. Enjoy listening. Chapter 1. Chapter 1, Who the Hell Stabbed Me in the Back? The sky was gloomy and the air was humid. Deep in Thomas Grand Canyon, corpses were scattered all over the now quiet battlefield. The war had been alleviated and a small group of orcs was retreating towards the canyon. The vulgar curses along with the chaotic footsteps of their invasive march had alerted and startled most of the vultures that were feasting on the dead corpses. Crows, vultures, and undead gulls hovered around the corpses. Afraid of the presence of the orcs around, they made loud cries as an attempt to scare away other potential feeders. One of the crows that was braver than the others took its sweet time devouring a long rotten gut. Suddenly, something from within the pile of corpses twitched and scared off the crow. A small patrol team consisting of only 3 orcs stopped in their tracks immediately. Halt! I heard something. The green-skinned orc, whose muscular body was clad in broken metal armor and rugged leather, squinted to focus on the source of the noise. I see something, said the same orc as he moved closer. I see it now. It's a human. I'll take care of him. The orc gripped his heavy axe tighter and paced slowly towards the pile of corpses. Make it quick. We don't want to fall too far behind. Amidst the darkness of the canyon, not even the crows were capable of seeing further ahead. However, the orc could walk towards the corpse with ease as it relied on his extreme sense of smell. After a quick rummage, the orc had managed to find a living human buried underneath a pile of rotten corpses. The human was a young male warrior. His armor was broken and in tatters. His sword was bent and chipped in all sort of places. There was something admirable about the warrior. Judging from the orc corpses around, he was the only human that was still alive. Despite that, his condition was not looking great. His weakened state had him knocking on death's door. Crack! Lightning struck down somewhere not too far from where the orc stood. The light from the lightning illuminated the entire canyon for a brief second, and he could see that the light in the human's eyes had faded. Die, muttered the orc as he lifted his axe with both of his hands. With one heavy stroke, the orc swung the axe downward. In a split second, the flash of light beamed off the dull sword and the orc could see a cold stare from the human's eyes. Huh! The orc gasped. In an instant, the warrior sprung up from his seemingly unconscious state and slit the orc's left shoulder. The intensity of the stroke was strong enough that it left a long trail of blood spurting out from the open wound. The orc grunted in pain and released the heavy axe in his hand. With quick footwork, the warrior made his way to the side of the massive orc and knocked him off his feet. Ugh! It all happened too fast. Before the strong orc could even react, he was forced to expel a mouthful of air as a steel-like left arm was pressed against his neck. Gaba! Just when he could move his left arm, a powerful force was pressed against his chest and his neck, struggling to prevent the orc from taking in any air. The orc struggled with all his might. Panic and fear started to invade the orc's mind as his desire to breathe was overwhelming and clouding his judgment. The next thing he knew, everything went dark. Like steel, his eyes were cold. The orc stopped struggling. There was no more noise, only the cries of the nearby crows. The human warrior pulled out the sword and knelt beside his kill. Calm yourself, Joshua, thought the man. He gathered his strength and scanned the area. All he could see was dismembered parts of what seemed to be unworldly beings. The scent of blood mixed with the rusty armor made the entire field smell like rust. Although it was not raining, the human's armor and leather hide were drenched with water. His entire arm was covered in blood, which trailed all the way down to his sword. No matter how much he wanted to calm himself, the grip of his hand on the sword refused to relax. Gloomy sky. Orcs. A battle. Joshua muttered a few words to himself. Each word was spoken with a deeper tone, and when he finally came to, he shouted, "Thomas Grand Canyon." The man stood up and turned around frantically. "Impossible. I should be in the ancient dungeon of the Ashen. I should be in Naya Fortress. I should be fighting demons. Why are there orcs?" Joshua recalled the vivid image of his battle. He was fighting demons in a scorched land that rained flames and hot lava. Yet, that vivid image was replaced with a gloomy dark sky, wet and cold atmosphere. The difference was like heaven and earth. Something is not right. Something is most certainly not right at all. Joshua gave up trying to reason with the unknown. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his abdomen and found it hard to breathe. He dropped to his hands and panted heavily. Drip, drip, droplets of rain started to fall on his metallic armor, and no sooner, a thunderstorm came. The pain in his chest was not the only sensation he felt then. When the water droplets seeped into his armor, he could feel the prickly pain throbbing all over his body. It was only then he realized that he was bleeding all over. Some cuts were so deep that he could not move freely without triggering the wound's throbbing pain. Joshua turned around and checked on himself. There were wounds so deep that if he did not begin emergency treatment, they would start to fester. Joshua merely scoffed at the pain. As a legendary warrior that had survived countless battles, Joshua had been in worse conditions that one might even consider absolutely hopeless. However, out from the ashes of defeat, Joshua had turned the tides of war more times than he had tasted salt. Such a wound was nothing. A mere flesh wound, or so he would say. Tisk. Joshua clicked his tongue disgruntledly. This is odd. I was sure that I was part of the war. The war that took place in the Starfall year 853, during the third expansion of Continental War. Thomas Grand Canyon should have been flattened after the legendary war. Joshua ignored the pain he felt on his body and stood up to have one last look at the surroundings. With his still shaky hands, he wiped away the blood-stained rainwater from his eyes and muttered in disbelief. Why? How am I here? The dark clouds rolled in from the top of the canyon and brought in more thunder and rain. The sound of war could be heard from all places. Crimson-colored water that started to turn into rivers flowed from the cliffs. This isn't right. Joshua let the cold rainwater wash the blood on his face and finally realized the truth. I'm dead. Memories started flooding in. It was the despicable gloomy sky that had triggered his memories. Naya Fortress. The Wall of Maria. He stood there, amongst countless warriors battling demons that came like a swarm of locusts in a land where hot lava was flowing like a river. The sky rained flaming meteors, and the only silhouettes that could be seen were the wings of rampaging demons. The number of demons that flew in the sky was more than enough to cast their shadows to fully darken the entire battleground. That, and the floating ship that belonged to the demon forces. Rocks that were covered in flames were hurled to the ground. Like a scene of hell on earth, they rained down on the fortress like a meteor shower. Rising from the ash and smoke, the legendary warriors formed an impregnable defensive formation as they charged towards the enemy. Joshua was one of them. Just when he was about to unsheath his sword to perform a sword-drawing technique, a long blade protruded from his abdomen. Along with some curses, Joshua's memories became scrambled like eggs. Joshua took a deep breath. He realized the truth and bellowed wildly. Who the F***ck stabbed me? Joshua's rage exploded like a whistling kettle. He forced himself to remember everything but could not recall what happened after he saw the sword's blade extending out of his abdomen. I've never died. Not once. Not since I became a legendary warrior. F***ck. Just when I thought I was killed by a demon, it was by my fellow comrade. Right then, Joshua frowned again. Although he could not let go of the grudge he bore for the backstabber, he had something else to worry about. Whether or not he was still alive, the obvious question should have been where he was. Even if he had died, he should be within the walls of Naya Fortress. How did he manage to magically appear among a bunch of dead orcs? Right when he was about to take a step, he sensed an ill omen. As a legendary warrior, his body's constitution allowed him to recover faster than normal humans. Wounds that would take months to heal would be reduced to several days. He should be able to walk and run normally after a quick rest, yet the wounds on his legs and arms were not even showing signs of healing. Even the pain, it was throbbing like there was a splinter inside. Did the game developers adjust the sensory settings to a whole new level? If he was not dead, where was the wound that was supposed to be in his belly? As for the wound that was caused by the curse, he could never heal them without the help of a GM. What is happening? The game is not Ubisoft, where the servers are potato and riddled with bugs. Move, damn it, cried Joshua as he tried to force his muscles to move forward. He clenched his teeth to suppress the pain when he moved his right leg. All the wounds that had opened up were immediately exposed to the rainwater. It stung so bad that Joshua could feel the sound of his heart pounding in his ears. Joshua stopped walking and fell to his knees. The metal armor on his body grazed against each other and made a sharp noise. From the edge of his armor, Joshua noticed a small horizontal wound that could have only been formed from a stab. The pain he felt was so strong that if any normal human were to be placed in his shoes, they would have fainted from the intense pain. Luckily, Joshua was not an average Joe in real life. Joshua got back up to his feet and took a deep breath, only to find that he was unable to restore his breathing rhythm. He ignored that fact and paced slowly towards the same pile of dead corpses where he was pulled out from. The sword in his hands was broken in many places and would easily crumble into dust with a gentle stroke. After so many years of fighting, he knew that it was vital for him to replace the weapon before a fight. Joshua took some time, but he managed to get used to the pain and arrived at the pile of corpses. There, Joshua started stabbing the corpses and managed to retrieve a long spear that was still in good condition. Although the spearhead had suffered a little damage on the edge, it does not affect its penetrating power. He discarded the sword in his hand and brandished the spear around to repel every single raindrop around him. After 2 seconds, he was certain that the spear was still in a good state and was most suited for his fighting style. Just when he relaxed and wanted to search for a place to rest, the silence of the grave was broken by the cries of orcs coming from the darkness. He killed Togu. 2 large orcs came out from the shadows and into his field of vision. Naturally, Joshua was unable to understand what they said due to the difference in language used. However, that was not his worry at the moment. The muscles on them were so huge that the armor covering their forearms was about to burst open. The extreme bloodlust and the crave for revenge were reflected in their eyes. Once the orcs had confirmed the enemy's position and number, the orcs did not give a second thought before jumping straight towards Joshua. Aurg. The one that attacked first was wielding a long scimitar. The usual green appearance of the orc darkened into a deeper, darker shade as if he had gone berserk. The blade was held up high in the air. The orc was ready to use his massive size and weight to cleave the weak human in half with a single stroke. However, before the sword could even be swung, the spearhead whistled through the air like a speeding arrow. The slightly rusty spearhead pierced through the thick metal armor and leather hide, and went straight to the orc's heart. Joshua spun the spearhead clockwise. He then twisted his body and pulled the spear from behind with such force that the faintly beating heart was still attached to the spearhead. The orc fell to the ground, lifeless, while green blood spurted out like a broken fountain. Are you really an orc? Joshua asked with a condescending look. He turned back to see that the other orc had stopped moving. He could see the fear in his eyes when his comrade was killed in less than a second. Is it even possible? The orc grunted with rage. The wrath in its eyes was fading as he wanted to turn tail and run. However, he was too slow to make his decision. Joshua stomped his left leg firmly into the ground and took aim. As the orc ran further, Joshua hurled the spear in his hand with such force that it flew across the air at supersonic speed. Droplets of water in the air evaporated instantly as it came into contact with the spearhead. The orc heard the sound of the spear whistling through the air and tried to parry it. However, just as he turned around, the spear pierced through his waist and pinned him to the ground. He grunted in pain and spoke something which Joshua could not understand. Joshua walked towards the dying orc and gave it a weird look. The orc tried to summon its strength, but his actions only caused more blood to spurt out from his open wound. Within a few seconds, the orc lost its life and remained motionless. I am sure that all the orcs have already been extinct. The system even announced that globally. When Joshua went to retrieve his spear from the dead orc, he felt a sharp throbbing pain from his scar. It was bleeding. Ow! Perhaps I overdid it? The injuries that he sustained were indeed serious. It was not just his muscles that were aching badly, he could even feel his internal organs bleeding from the inside. After killing 3 orcs, the pain he felt was so intense that not even the strongest dose of morphine could ease the pain. At that moment, all his wounds, both fresh and old, were crying in pain as though pleading for their owner to stop moving anymore. Joshua paced away from the dead orcs and towards where the light shone the brightest. However, before he could even take 5 steps, his hands started to tremble violently. He dropped his spear and sat down on the ground. Ha! 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 Why am I panting for breath? I am a legendary warrior. Such a wound would not make me this exhausted. I should not be this breathless after merely killing 3 orcs. He tried to lift the spear from the ground. As he did, he could feel the icy cold stones on the ground which made his hands shiver. Such a sensation. The smell, the pain, the sight. Not even the most powerful gaming company could model such a scene. There's no way the game could virtualize this. As more and more doubts began to grow in his mind, the same bad omen from before started to resurface into his sea of thoughts. Thomas Grand Canyon should have been made into a flat land. Yet, why am I seeing cliffs and trenches? I was supposed to be fighting demons in Naya Fortress, yet I am awake in this place. The rain continued to pour like cats and dogs and did not show any signs of stopping. What is going on? A lightning bolt struck down and illuminated the entire canyon for a brief second. Joshua picked up a sword fragment and took the chance to see his reflection. The face of a stranger was reflected on the sword fragment, yet Joshua felt a sense of familiarity from it. Who is that me? What happened to me? Within a second, a sharp pain struck his brain as if he was cleaved by an axe. Immediately, he fell to the ground and writhed in intense agony. What came next were all the memories that flooded into his mind that were supposedly his. Chapter 2. Chapter 2, The Division. Countless memories flooded into his mind. Humans achieved evolution through the pain of war. They were a species that thrived on deadly battles. That was why, when a warrior cleaved an orc in half, there was no emotion. No feelings of remorse. The dark clouds continued to roll in from the far end of the canyon. Along with the rain and strong gale, sounds of war horns, signaling troops to attack and to withdraw, could be heard echoing from all corners of the canyon. It was supposed to be a mere passing shower. However, as the wind blew stronger, heavy rain came down onto the land. It did not take long for the rain to wash away all the blood stains on Joshua's metal armor. No sooner, the water started to rise. Before he knew it, the water level had already submerged his leg guards. Joshua's breath did not seem to be coming back, no matter how hard he tried to control it. Weakened beyond comprehension, Joshua's shaky hands reached for his battered helmet. He then discarded it a few feet away. The thick green blood of the orc was washed away by the rain. Mixed along with his own, the discolored blood of both red and green left his black hair. Eyes dead, Joshua looked around again. There were nothing but corpses and internal organs scattered around. Tons of dead orcs were piled up like a miniature mountain. He was the sole survivor, as not a single living being could be seen. The vultures, crows, and scavengers had already left when the rain came pouring down. He was the only human alive. I did it? Joshua laughed maniacally. One-man army. Over hundreds of orcs killed. Such a tale could perhaps only exist in folk tales and bedtime stories. It might seem hard to believe, yet he had made that story real. Ha! Ha! Joshua's laughter reverted back to his irregular panting. He could still feel the throbbing pain from the open wound. His headache did not help to ease his physical injuries. The aftermath of war had started to kick in then. His entire being shook so badly that his sight suddenly turned blurry. Countless of visions appeared as if they were actually real. Demon. Meteor. Kill. Betrayal. Orcs. War. Territory. Grah. The pain in his head grew more agonizing. The veins on his temples started to bulge and were already on the verge of bursting. Joshua gripped his head hard with his hands and writhed in pain. Just when he thought that the worst was over, he was experiencing the worst pain he could feel. Compared to arrows and swords, the pain could never compare to the one he was feeling in his head right now. All his willpower was replaced with rage, reasoning with chaos. At that moment, the being that was Joshua was no longer human, but a hungry, bloodthirsty wolf. Demon. Orcs. In the darkness of the raining sky and silent canyon, two red eyes gleamed. All that mattered now was to kill the sons of B****s until none were left. Unconsciously, Joshua stood up. The steel sword in his hand rattled with excitement as it sensed the bloodlust from its wielder. The solid iron hilt bent inward from the sheer gripping force. Not enough, the man lifted his head. His eyes were bright crimson. The man turned his head and focused on the approaching orc army. His eyes widened with rage and pure insanity as he cried. This is not even enough. In the next second, he sprinted like a cheetah. His surroundings went dark and nothing but the orcs were in his sight. Just after a few moments, the orc army stopped moving. Joshua appeared from behind them and out came a splatter of blood. The battle was merely in its infancy. F***ck. When did you become so reckless? Joshua shook his head violently to regain consciousness. His facial muscles twitched. He tried to apply a little pressure to his temple to ease his spinning head and tried to resist the urge to throw up. I was interdimensionally transported during a fight. So, I didn't die? That's lucky. After the short burst of pain, Joshua could breathe normally. Regaining his composure, he began to recall his memories. Joshua Van Radcliffe. The eldest son of the Baron in the military force located in the northern region. Incidentally, he was also the only person to inherit the title. Following the usual tradition of the Radcliffe family, Joshua was beaten into shape by his father and the knights in service to his family. From a wimpy little crybaby, the boy grew up to be a fine young man. After reaching his coming of age, he was enlisted in the army and was left there on his own to build relationships and as well as to expand his social circle. Everything went smoothly and Joshua started out as a bright, happy-go-lucky fellow. Naturally, being the sole successor of a powerful noble family with territory coupled with sharp battle instincts, the man was approached by many. As time flew by, Joshua had performed admirably in the battlefield and had earned many military merits. As such, along with his ranks, he gained many friends and connections all over the place. The entire process would have been perfect if it were not for a sudden message he received. Joshua's family being rooted in the cold north, far from the affluent empire's center of influence in the south was due to one sole reason. It was a service to the people and a duty to guard something. Although it was unknown to Joshua, the responsibility that was hammered into him since he was a child was severe. The old count never mentioned it in front of anyone else. Not even Joshua. When he tried to ask about it, his father would merely reply him with a vague and unsatisfying answer. You're not qualified to learn the truth. Come back to me only when you're capable of standing on your own 2 feet. Naturally, for a young man, standing on his own 2 feet would equate to growing stronger. As such, Joshua had only been pursuing strength the martial way. When Joshua had received the message from his territory, he felt a little intrigued. Joshua knew his father well enough to know that his father's stubbornness would never bring him to initiate a conversation. In fact, it had been several years since he had last spoke to him. However, when he opened the sealed letter and read its content, his blood was boiling. There is trouble with the seal of the defended town. Your father has personally gone to resolve the matter. As there is no one currently in charge in the city, unknown forces might proceed to scheme an invasion. With the current situation in place, please return to the city to guard the territory. The person who sent the letter was the old butler of his house. Joshua was skeptical. He would not believe anyone else but the old butler. He knew the old man since he was young and that he would never lie to him. Now that there was a new problem brewing at home, a young warrior like Joshua could not rest until something was done. Just when he had made preparations to retire from the front line and leave for the north, the Empire had issued a sudden command to the front line and ordered the army to attack the orcs in the west. It was something that no one could predict. Props to the commander at the headquarters. To cheat the enemies, one must first cheat one's own allies. Joshua was stumped. There was an absolute rule on the Empire's military law: one cannot leave the front lines during war. It did not matter if Joshua was the son of the Count of the North, even the nobles could not bend the rules of the military. Hence, there was nothing Joshua could do to solve the problem in the north. As such, with pressing trouble in his mind, he bore an intense hatred and anger into the battlefield. That and a person from another world had come to merge with his soul and body, becoming a completely different being. His mind was still as scrambled as a stir-fried beef dish. Both his memories were mixed up like a bowl of fruit salad. The experience of a legendary warrior and his years of vigorous training had given birth to a new Joshua. It allowed him to step onto the battlefield alone and face off hundreds of orcs. Even after the first few battalions were killed, his berserk state was not quelled. As a result, he went straight into the orcs' military encampment and slaughtered them all on his own. That explained the reason why his entire body was battered. After killing for an entire day and night, pushing his way through the narrow canyon, killing more than 300 orcs, piling all the corpses into mounds, his body went into a state of extreme exhaustion. Interesting. Joshua muttered. The now calm Joshua wiped away the mud and sand that was on his face and raised his head to the sky. The rain had begun to let up, leaving a few dark clouds and lightning that was accompanied by thunder, which was still roaring in the heavens. With a sense of acceptance, Joshua muttered, "Looks like this place is the Mycroft continent. The Battle of the Division started here. This should be the setting of the game." The rain finally came to an end. He widened his tired eyes and gazed into the night sky. The stars were exceptionally bright since the rain clouds had finally drifted away. He dipped his fingers into the muddy water and tasted it. He then lifted a finger up high and felt the sensation of the wind. The moon is that way. The wind is blowing the other. There's warmth in the squall. Based on the taste of the mud around me, it should be starfall year 831. Right now, I think it's the end of autumn, which is mid-October. The historical warfare glorious expedition should come to an end soon. The orcs' impregnable Fort Diru East should be destroyed in the first battle. Sigh, Joshua sighed heavily. I've come back to this time. He then raised an eyebrow and scoffed. Seems like I'm not too late. Before he was interdimensionally teleported, he was a veteran player of the full-dive virtual reality game called Continental War. He was ranked 3rd on the grand ranking and 1st on the legendary champions ranking. The game had been active for 8 years in real time and 32 years in virtual time. It had survived through 8 major expansions, 12 historical events, and hundreds of legendary quests. The game had different servers which had its own individual events and plots. The kingdom in the south, the empire in the north, the flatlands in the east, and the mountains in the west. Before he was transmigrated, he should be proceeding with events in the southern kingdom, which required him to travel to the northern empire. Hence, that was why he knew a little or two about the events that transpired in the north. The war between the Empire and the Orcs was the second historical event called the Glorious Expedition, hosted in the northern server. The first event was the beginning of the Great Division War. At that time, he had been invited by a friend to become a part of the Emperor-hired mercenaries, assigned to carry out the Flatland Orcs massacre mission. That was why he was not a clueless idiot when he came to this alternate world. The victory will belong to the humans. That will be of absolute certainty. The Empire has been training 3 generations of soldiers. When the day comes, they would be ready to give it their all. Hence, with such preparations, they would have slaughtered all the Orcs without a problem. The outcome has been determined. I should be able to retire from the front line now. When he came to that conclusion, Joshua became extremely calm despite the throbbing physical pain. He decided to put the matter of him being transported to an alternate world aside. He returned to reality and began to plan the pathway for his future. Right now, the most crucial thing for me to do now is to find the other humans. Find a safe place to rest and think of the matter after I've recovered. Joshua had decided to leave the thought of transmigrating to the alternate world behind as it would do him no good in terms of survival. Both the original Joshua of this world as well as the one that came from the apparent real world were open-minded and couldn't care less about the matter. Whatever happened, happened, and could not occur in any other way. One part of him was the kind that could get used to a new place within a few minutes of strolling. The other was the kind of man that would not bother to ponder about the things that he did not understand. All in all, whatever happened, happened. What mattered most was the fact that he was still breathing. If he could not turn back time with a flick of his finger, he would just accept the reality he was brought into and live with it. Or rather, suck it up. With Joshua's soul, the one that came from Earth, taking control of the reborn Joshua, he would need to think well about his next step. Even though there was that problem that needed to be solved back in the north, there's nothing he could do right then with a battered body. I need to check on my condition. Nonchalantly, Joshua raised his hands and gestured downward in the air. A status window appeared out of thin air and Joshua checked his own character status. Name, Joshua Van Radcliffe. Form, Leader. Designation, Brave Fighter, grants a chance to frighten when attacked. Race, Human Northwest Faction, Racial Skill, Warrior Race, Battle Experience X 1.1. Level, Level 28 Silver, Challenger Level, Level 29 Silver. Attribute. Physique, Average Human Life. HP, Critical. Vitality, Critical. Morale, Exhausted. Magic Power, Sealed. Status, Muscles Torn, Extreme Fatigue, Enfeebled. Class, Black Crow Assault / Northern Battle Rider. Talent, Weapon Proficiency, Class, Blood for Blood, Self. Profession, Blacksmith. Skill, Max Willpower. Profession Skill, Level 21 Weaponsmithing, Level 22 Armor Smithing, Level 9 Magic Weapon Smithing, Level 3 Magic Armor Smithing, Level 1 Magic Tool Smithing. Equipment, Broken Helmet, Worn Out Metal Armor, Rusty Sheen Guard, Leather Greaves. Weapon, Standard Empire Long Spear Mark III, Damaged. Your enemies would never dare to face you from the front. There's Mortal, Steel, Silver, Gold, Supreme, and Legendary. And I'm Silver Tier? I have dropped from Legendary Tier to a petty little Silver Tier. Sigh. My stats are indeed worse than before, but I could not ask for any better than this. Everything is below average. Humph. As expected from a man of nobility. A well-trained body is what I really need. The game Continental War was all too similar to real-world physics. Skills and spells would require the same exact actions, spells, and chants. If one were to take damage, they would feel pain which would affect one's strength. All basic attributes could be trained. Naturally, the most important aspects to look at were levels and skills. Levels would grant skill points to be used on skills based on one's class. Collecting skill points was for the purpose of investing to create one's own skill tree as well as to develop a unique fighting style. That was the path which all professional gamers would take. Before being transmigrated into this world, he had already obtained the achievement Supreme Skill. It was one of the requirements to be ranked at legendary tier. All skills had to be unlocked. He never thought he could bring over his game character stats into this world. That would only mean that he could freely choose his skills without the need to rely on or stick to any given path. Still, what's with this form? Weird. What is challenger level? Did players have that sort of thing before? It looks like I am a boss to be killed. Joshua did pay much heed to attribute stats since those aspects could be raised easily with a little bit of physical training. As long as he could get himself back to a healthy form, he was confident that he could take on the world. However, his current state was nowhere near healthy. His recovery speed was too slow to a point of non-existence. He would need healing promptly. Again, Joshua did not want to put too much thought into it. He closed the stat window and limped away using the spear as a walking stick. He could faintly hear the sound of human voices coming from the other end of the canyon and paced towards it. He could walk down several steep hills with some effort and managed to spot the human army encampment based on his memory. Just then, he felt something odd. Something was extremely odd. Wait. What did I just miss? What did I just do? He was too used to it before. Joshua widened his eyes in shock when he had realized the truth. I just transmigrated to another world, didn't I? Even if I did spend half my life playing games, it wouldn't make sense if my brain could conjure out a system for me. I should not be seeing a window in the beginning. I'm no longer in a game. Still in his shocked state, Joshua tried to call out the stat window again. It popped out without fail and Joshua examined the entire window to make sure he was not hallucinating. It's real. Joshua was happy for a moment before he frowned worriedly. Am I really seeing this? Or is it just a hyper-realistic illusion? I've heard of sailors getting homesick and being able to conjure an illusion of their lovers. Perhaps I am doing just that? No. I best hope not. Just then, he saw a few messages popping up at the corner of his UI. End of battle. Calculating results. Killed Orc Axe Warrior Togu, level 19 silver, killed Orc Kidnapper Wallen, level 18 silver, killed Orc Elite Soldier Nadja, level 23 silver. You have obtained 45 points of Expedition Army Reputation. Expedition Army Reputation, esteemed, 5037. It's real. I couldn't have imagined it. My mind is not brilliant enough to conjure up such things. His frowning expression relaxed immediately. Happily, Joshua smiled. Since it is this way, there's nothing that I should be afraid of. Truth be told, he was a little worried and afraid of his fate in the new world. However, he had nothing to worry about. As an ex-legendary champion, coupled with the experience and strength of Joshua of this world, he would never have to worry about taking on any challenges. Now that he had the support of the system, he could gain heights that no one could achieve. Such a privilege could affect his fate, his destiny. Perhaps even steer the fate of that world. Continental War had countless historical events and legendary quests, which resulted in endings which he was dissatisfied with and hated. However, now that he was at the stage where none of that had taken place, he had the chance to make things flow in a different way. Joshua started to feel the excitement building up in his heart. He gripped the spear in his hand tightly and smiled. A bright glint flashed in his eyes. There's more to this. I'm sure of it. A real alternate world. A world that would be larger and wider than the gaming world. He would be sure to see more of what he could not see before. He would be sure to meet more people, fight stronger opponents, kill more devilish enemies. Such a world could release him from his bonds of mediocrity, a means to release him from his common daily boring life. A means to be a real hero. Ha ha ha. Joshua laughed at his own childish thoughts and decided to calm himself down. Well, I could do that. Only if I get over this. First on the to-do list. Get a place to rest. After thinking logically, he realized the harsh reality. That or I might die from hunger and thirst. Despite having a computer-like system in a magical, mystical world, he was not in a game any longer. He was living and breathing, and could also die. He would die if his HP went down to 0. His current stats was too low to even lift a fork. Before, he could fight the orcs due to a sudden spike in adrenaline. However, that was before when he was actually fighting for his life. Limping like an old man, he was overwhelmed with fatigue. He must quickly leave the dangerous canyon. The 3 orcs he fought before most likely belonged to a group of soldiers that was retreating. There would be a high chance that reinforcements would return to check on the missing orcs and might stumble upon him. There was no way he could fight them again like before. Despite having starlight shining upon the earth, the canyon was still void of actual illumination. Joshua limped forward slowly and made his way around countless corpses and dismembered limbs. He could only hear deafening silence. Nothing else. There were no other noises besides the sound of his feet dragging against the muddy ground. After what seemed to be an eternity, he saw tiny dots of light. It was a bonfire belonging to the human military camp. Out of the blue, he could hear footsteps coming from the front. Instinctively, he could sense living beings marching towards him, carrying lights and waving them with vigor. Just when he raised his head to observe the source of light more closely, the sound of footsteps got faster. Deputy Commander. When he was having a moment of doubt, he heard a concerned voice. In the next moment, a large group of men clad in black armor that had dead crows as accessories rushed toward him in a fan-out manner. From his point of view, it looked like they had left their formation and was sprinting towards him. Joshua stopped in his tracks and took a deep breath. What the F***ck? That's scary. Chapter 3. Chapter 3, The Itch in the Fists. A corner of the canyon was still engulfed by the night sky. The troops of soldiers rushed over to Joshua with speed that could rival that of a cheetah. Mud was sent flying with each heavy step they took. Just when Joshua forced himself to calm down, he noticed they did not bear any malicious intent. When they were a few meters from him, their speed slowed down. None of them looked beaten up like he was. Deputy Commander. One of the soldiers stood out among the troop and frowned heavily with eyes of concern. Such injuries. Are you all right? Like hell I am. When he first saw his face, he could not recognize him. However, his memories came flooding in and he immediately knew the names and faces of all the men that were clad in the crow armor. They were the Crow's frontline strike team that was under his command. When he recalled their names and faces, he relaxed and sighed. Well? Help me out, will you? Please be careful of the wounds. I'm bleeding like a faucet here. Instantly, like waking up from a dream, the soldiers realized his condition and rushed to help. As soldiers of the Empire, all of them were trained with emergency first aid skills. However, when they tried to tend to his wounds, they found it to be beyond their capabilities. Such wounds would make any normal human bedridden for months, lest mention of even walking. Joshua noticed that most of the soldiers around him were in a state of shock, but it was a matter that he did not care. The soldiers were genuinely surprised to see Joshua since they thought he was long dead. How could anyone not be? The man charged into the orcs' base camp alone. No one would have thought that he could come back alive, and still walk in one piece. Even though he was limping badly, he was still walking. From the looks of it, he could still fight if needed. as expected of the deputy commander. It took only 2 soldiers out of the entire group to help Joshua back to the army camp. There, 2 priests and 1 necromancer tended to his wounds. Even though the necromancer class sounds bad and malicious, they were not the enemies in the Mycroft continent. They were accepted as official tender to dead corpses for the purpose of studying the human anatomy. In fact, their knowledge expands further to other species as well. They were considered as the best surgeons since they had intimate knowledge of the internal structure of humans. That, and the ability to communicate with spiritual beings. Their contributions proved to be extremely helpful to the army. Naturally, amongst those that studied the art of necromancy, there was a small faction that specialized in the art of killing. They were called the Death Reapers. Weirdly enough, they were fascinated with experimenting with living beings, making gruesome modifications to their bodies and corrupting their souls. Some of their greatest achievement were zombies, chimeras, abominations, undead puppets, and many more monsters and unnatural creations famous throughout the history of mankind. Priests' divine arts were only capable of restoring external wounds and injuries. On the other hand, necromancers excelled at healing internal injuries. After 30 minutes of healing, and a not-so-fancy meal, Joshua could feel energy circulating through his body. All the injuries around his abdomen were healed perfectly. The HP value on the attribute tab had changed from critical to injured. The negative status from before was elevated to only exhausted. Joshua gobbled the last drop of army rations and asked, "Why are you guys here? Give me a brief report." "We are the company that was in charge of clearing the battlefield to prepare a blockade at Fort Derues." The man that Joshua was talking to was his subordinate, the captain of the company. His name was Ryan. As instructed, Ryan began to explain the situation. The orc forces on the front line have been destroyed completely. Currently, they are completely forced back to their base. Our scouts reported that they have withdrawn and are standing guard at the fortress. Our only task for now is to seal off every possible route in and out of the fortress. The Black Crow Army was one of the 4 great armies of the Empire. They consisted of the Frontal Assault Division, the General Soldiers, the Heavy Assault Knights, and the Magicians. The Magicians were made up of priests and other magicians that were capable of conjuring spells, both offensive and defensive. There were also 5 divisions in the Department of Military Logistics. In the game, there was also a special warrior class called the Black Crow Ambusher, a special knight class called the Black Crow Conqueror, and a special bandit class called the Death Sweeper. Joshua was young, yet he was one of the 2 deputy commanders of the Frontal Assault Division. Half the reason was due to his family's name, and the other half was due to his own ability as a fighter. The soldiers were impressed with his fighting skills and revered him as their leader. His position was good, but after saving him and knowing of his achievement, their respect towards him was raised even higher. All because Ryan and the other soldiers had scouted the battlefield where he came back from. The air of the battleground was heavily polluted with the smell of both rust and blood. The earth was sullied heavily by the remains of the corpses and had turned into an unnatural rotten color. The smell that lingered around the place could make any man ill. It was a nightmarish scene, and no one could believe that Joshua could survive such a battle that had resulted in such a scene. The fact that he was actually walking back to them was solid proof of what he was capable of. Ryan then swallowed his pride and spoke, "The sun is still down. We are unable to confirm the exact number of orcs." He paused for a moment. He could not even think of his next words. After a few seconds, the soldier adjusted his helmet and straightforwardly exclaimed, I had been in doubt of your ability as a deputy commander due to your age and proofless strength, yet after seeing the battlefield with my own eyes, I must apologize for underestimating you, sir." Joshua was indifferent to what he said. "For your glorious deeds, perhaps even the general would see you in a different light. I sincerely hope that you would receive the Blade of Glory." The Blade of Glory was not a weapon to be used, but a medal of honor given to those that had achieved something great in the military. Those who acquired such an item would undoubtedly be a man of prestige and bravery. In the game, however, the Blade of Glory badge was a necessary achievement to obtain the Platinum Trophy achievement. The highest price he had seen players buying it for was over 100,000 gold coins. Normally, the price would only be around 20,000 gold coins. As a comparison to its price, a full set of magic armor would be around 70,000 to 80,000 gold coins. In the game, one Blade of Glory medal would be exchanged for an Explorer Knight appointment manuscript. The completed task would enable a player to open an instant dungeon in an inhabited wild wasteland or the dark forest. Defeat the dungeon and one could build an Explorer Knight's territory and be its owner. Perhaps so, said Joshua with as little interest as possible whilst waving his hand to dismiss it. Back then, when he was still playing the game, he went through hell and back just to form the best group garrison. Since the Blade of Glory thing was a hard-to-earn item, he spent more than a whole day and night just to defeat the dungeon. The entire ordeal was so mentally and physically taxing that he felt nauseated just thinking about it. Such a thing was not even as valuable as a Master Healer appointment manuscript, hence, it was not even worth thinking about. In fact, he would rather think of nothing right then. Not even about the orcs. The dungeon in the Northwest Flatlands had been raided more than 100 times. That was why he could kill the orcs without a second thought. Joshua felt his body was already on the verge of healing completely. In fact, he felt like all he needed was a good, quiet, and peaceful sleep. Joshua nodded and sent Ryan away politely. Well, you have your duty to perform. Carry on and do not feel the need to tend to me anymore. Ah. What will you be doing now? Deputy Commander. I'll be back to talk to the officer alone. What he meant by the officer was not the Army's general but the Brigade General of the Frontal Assault Division. Following military law and regulations, every Army officer must gather together for a meeting to discuss their given task, which included Joshua. However, due to his previous predicament, he had missed the meeting. However, all he needed to do was to speak with his superior officer to notify him of his report. After rejecting Ryan's men's offer of assistance, he changed into fresh new clothes and made his way towards the central command center of the Black Crow Army. Aside from the wound located at the corner of his eye that could not fully heal, other major wounds had been healed partially. Even though he felt a little tired and his eyelids were weighing a ton, his posture remained neat and refined. Half an hour later, Joshua reached the central command without any interruption. It was most probably due to his presence of a deputy commander. On the other hand, his superior officer, the Brigade General of the Black Crow Frontal Assault Division, clad in heavy gold-plated armor, was sipping on a cup of coffee, while reading a report sent by his spy. He had short curly golden hair and a body that could fight a wild bear. His arms were so ripped that they looked like could explode from his armor at any given time. His gaze was so piercing that they could tear the paper that he was reading then. Before he could finish his report, Otto spit the cold coffee out and inhaled deeply. The wild wolf squad of the Eta tribe has been annihilated. No survivors. Reinforcements cancelled. He pulled out a napkin and wiped his mouth. Frowning, he said, Eta tribe was the largest orc tribe. Wild Wolf squad consisted of their elite killers. That's more than 100 silver tier orcs right there. They were all above average in strength and not some random scraps. How could they be completely annihilated? Otto put the report down on his desk and sighed. Did the orcs capture the spy and beat the crap out of him? No, that wouldn't be right. They wouldn't dare to write something as absurd as this in a million years. Whatever they write must be true. Otto picked the report up and flipped a few pages back to read it again. After a while, someone came into his tent and announced with a deafening voice. Report. Deputy Commander of the Frontal Assault Division, Joshua has arrived. Let him in. Sir. Yes, sir. Joshua let himself pass the covers of the tent and noted that his superior officer was glaring at him with the eyes that identified him as an enemy. "Tell me the truth. Were you possessed by the demons from the abyss?" What? You? A man of your caliber annihilated the entire Wild Wolf squad? Ha? No offense, but you don't strike me as someone capable of something of that magnitude. Otto crossed his arms and continued to glare at Joshua. It was as if he was meeting him for the first time. His glare gradually softened, so did his manner of speech. "Even though we have the terrain advantage at our disposal, I must say that your ability has far exceeded what I had expected of you. Gold tier even." Joshua finally understood what he was talking about. Otto was informed about his feat of killing a bunch of orcs. Still, what is the Wild Wolf squad? Joshua did not realize what facial expression he was making then until Otto screamed. "Look at yourself now. What were you thinking when you were behind enemy lines? Do you even know what you did?" Joshua remained unfazed, and when Otto saw it, he sighed heavily. He felt like he was an old man who would never understand the mind of a young man. He sat back on his chair and tapped the table rhythmically. "Do you not want to go back and claim that title of Count? My young soon-to-be Count?" Otto knew the Count well, who was also Joshua's father. Since both of them had a close relationship, both Joshua and Otto would drop the formalities when conversing with each other. "Yes, sir. What you said is true. Sigh. Even the blind can see that you're exhausted. Go back and rest. There's nothing for you to do right now." The brigade general shook his head and signaled Joshua to leave. Right then, when Joshua pulled the tent cloth aside, Otto made a final comment: "I'm glad that you're still alive." The next day, the battle between the orcs and humans come to a temporary halt. The front-line troop of the Black Crow army was called back to rest and recuperate. A large tent, filled with neatly arranged decorations that signified someone of high rank, had appeared at the central command center. Inside, there were signs of smoke and ash on the floor. On the table next to the makeshift bed were various tools and canisters that were meant for weapon maintenance. Joshua had changed into a new uniform and had slept like a log for the entire night. Just when he was about to complete writing his retirement letter, he heard an officer calling him from outside his tent. He placed the quill aside and said, "Speak your mind. The brigade general wishes to have a word with you. Coincidentally, I have something to tell him as well." "Tell him I'll be right over." "Roger that, sir." After a brief period. "Withdraw." "No. Retire." "It's the same. I understand that there's trouble in your hometown. But right now, it's warring period. I have neither the authority nor clearance to relieve you of your duties." Otto rested his weary head on his right palm. He looked a little too annoyed and disappointed. Still, the war is almost over. Winter is coming and the orcs will call off the war. From the looks of it, their rations would not support their cause. When the time comes, you will be transferred back after the usual process. It would be too late by then." Joshua cried. His voice was so loud that other soldiers that were patrolling outside the black and gold adorned giant tent could hear him. The superior officer sitting behind a large mahogany desk frowned immediately. Joshua did not care. The letter has clearly expressed the urgency of the issue. If I waited until winter, who knows what sort of mess would befall my home. You can scream and shout all you want to me. That does not change the fact that I cannot let you leave. I called you here not to inconvenience you. There are some guys sent by the higher UPS and they called out a few names. One of them was you. All the more reason that I cannot let you go." Brigade General Otto pressed his hands together and rested his upper body on the wooden desk. He raised his head to look at the serious glare of his underling and felt a little troubled. "Who are they?" "You'll see them in a while. Just. They are the Golden Libra. Joshua Van Radcliffe. Born on 15th October, Starfall year 810. The first heir to the ruling family of Moldavia. Army participant in the year 826. Acceptance by recommendation to the Empire's military academy in year 828. Year 830, graduated from the military academy with the highest honor. After receiving exemplary experience from the academy, you have been fighting in the front line at the Northeast Flatlands, in Thomas Grand Canyon. A long, monotonous speech was given by a middle-aged man who was sitting at a long board table. The man was wearing a long red robe with black stripes on its edges. Like a machine, his face was impassive and his voice was extremely flat. The current time and date is 11:47 hours, year 831, 16th October. He paused and turned his head to face Joshua. Finally, after the long meaningless speech of Joshua's personal life, he spoke in a playful tone. "There's 13 minutes till noon, Mr. Deputy Commander of the Black Crow Frontal Assault Division. That's 13 minutes of time for you to explain your offense." There was a bright and extremely grand medal resting on the man's left breast. The medal had a sword on the upper half and a tasseled wheat decor that surrounded the sword like a reversed arch. It was the symbol for the Golden Libra. A symbol that signified that the wearer as one of the members of the royal court. "Right. Mr. Investigator, Sir Mensk. Before we start." Thanks to auto-advise, he was mentally prepared for such an interview. Hence, he was not nervous. He cupped both of his hands together and politely asked, "May I have a cup of tea?" "Absolutely," said the man, again with the monotonous tone. Still, he was good to talk to. "Red tea?" "Yes, please. A little ice would be nice." "My pleasure." The guards that were standing at the door came in and offered him a cup of cold red tea. The investigator then added, "It's 12 minutes to noon." Joshua took a sip of the cold tea and smiled. "That seems to be a problem for you." Ha ha ha. Both of them laughed nonchalantly, yet Joshua's mind was whirring. He had no idea that his act of retiring from the army during a battle had spread so fast to the higher UPS. It was even less than 2 days. Such an effective investigation. He knew clearly that a soldier, whether high-ranked or not, was not allowed to withdraw from a battle in progress due to the possible disruption of the military formation. When he was transferring between worlds, he had already broken 3 martial laws. A regular soldier would have been thrown into the stockade and wait for the court-martial to conduct their judgment. Even he, a noble from a noble family, would be sent to stand for trial by the royal court. That was the main reason why Investigator Mensk was sent there to question Joshua. The royal court was not a charity organization. They represented the empire's authority as a whole. The authority covered even the highest of nobles residing in the empire. They punished criminals that belonged to the nobles and mediated territorial wars. Their duties included reporting directly to the emperor about the hidden shadow corp that moved around in secrecy, gathering intelligence about the movement of all nobles. All in all, they handled all cases that revolved around the powerful nobles. Technically, cases such as a son committing homicide, killing his brother and assassinating his father to claim the title of count was part of the report which the royal court must comply. Though, it would seem that the court had never handled such a case before. He knew the power they held. He knew how ferocious they could be. Yet, Joshua remained unfazed even when Mensk's voice turned threatening. "I know my crime. I have disobeyed a direct order, left the command center without permission, and broke from the military formation. In summary, I violated Martial Law Rule 2, 6, and 17. Joshua took another sip of tea and continued his speech, "I will accept any punishment of the court without any objections." He was calm. Without stuttering, he confessed all his crimes and admitted he was guilty. "I listen and comply." There was still no emotion on Mensk's face, as if he had expected Joshua to say something like that. "You're exceptionally cooperative." Joshua placed the cup down on the table and kept quiet. He was not behaving like a snob, nor did he feel like he was wrongly accused. All because he knew that the law was absolute. An unbreakable holy guidance of the army. The victor has no sin. Joshua had close ties with the southern royal court and had witnessed many of the cases handled. He knew what those words meant. True, he had disobeyed a direct order and left the formation, disrupting and causing chaos among the soldiers of the frontal assault. However, he did single-handedly destroy the orcs' defenses in the left wing and annihilated all the orcs that were withdrawing from the battle. The man was a killing machine. He had killed over 300 enemies. An achievement which no soldier had ever done before in history. If he had failed, he would be sent to prison and wait for trial. There's even the possibility of him dying in the war before he was sent to prison. The investigator would be more than happy to write down his name in the logbook saying something like Joshua Van Radcliffe, heir to the Northern Moldavia family, violated the martial law and will be sent to the 4th Noble Prison. However, Joshua did not fail. He succeeded in pushing back the orcs from the canyon. All he had to do was to confess his crime and await his punishment. Joshua Van Radcliffe. Your crimes and achievements have been thoroughly investigated by the royal court. You need not fear unjust treatment. Such a casual phrase, of which Joshua knew what it actually meant. It's what Mensk, the middle-aged man, working as a diligent investigator for the court, would say when he wanted no trouble for himself and Joshua. All he had to do was to listen to what Mensk had to say and everything would be over in a blink of an eye. Without pausing in between sentences, Mensk quickly connected his sentence coldly and again, monotonously. After considerations, the court has come to a decision. You have indeed broken the law, yet there was nothing but benefits for the army. Your bravery was proven true and contained no malicious schemes towards the empire and its interests. Henceforth, your judgment has been decided. Effective immediately, Joshua Van Radcliffe shall be relieved from his duties as the Deputy Commander or the Black Crow Frontal Assault Division. You shall henceforth retire from the army and return to your territory. However, your achievement will not be forgotten, yet your achievement cannot make your violations go unpunished. Hence, the court had decided to award you with the Blade of Glory for your exemplary bravery on the battlefield. As he finished reading off the scroll in his hands, Mensk turned to Joshua and smiled eerily. The judgment has been delivered to the Deputy Commander of the Black Crow Frontal Assault Army. That is all. He paced slowly towards Joshua and whispered. We had initially decided to temporarily have you on probation for 3 months and then raise your ranks to that of a general. However, considering that fact that you have troubles back in the north while the war with the orcs will be prolonged until the end of summer next year, we changed the decision to have you removed from the military and send you back home. How do you plea? Plea? What else was there to plea for? That's what he wanted since the beginning. Joshua smiled and nodded his head silently. I accept and obey. It was an obvious reward for Joshua. There was no need for the court to remove him from his ranks. Removal from a military rank did not mean that he could never come back. It just meant that he was stripped of his deputy commander role to become a regular soldier. He was never removed from the military. Also, he was able to go home, legally. Joshua, who had made preparations to retire from the military itself, was giving a chance to go home. It was more of a reward than a punishment. This ends the court session. Please adjourn to your seat and I shall proceed on with the Black Crow Army's tradition. I shall give you the warrior's blessing. Mensk's voice became dull and deep, his glare hollow and out of focus. Humanity's fragility leads to death. Unconsciously, Joshua felt the need to stand firm and still. A burning passion rose from his gut and Joshua opened his mouth to speak loud and clear, yet faith bears life. May the glory of the dead be with you. O man of bravery. The two exchanged salutations and ended the court session. Well then. I'll hope that you'll have a nice. Mensk held his tongue when something on inside his robe started to vibrate. An emergency magic broadcast message. Mensk nodded apologetically and pulled out a silvery metallic pole that looked like a miniature pitchfork. Engraved on the side of the two forks were runes which he held it against his palm to imbue magic in it to activate the device. Level 3 emergency message. What could it be? Should I take my leave? Asked Joshua promptly when he heard the message's level of importance. He would not want to listen to something he would get into trouble with. It's fine. This message has only level 2 secrecy. Rest assured that it's something that you should know as well. The rune was activated and the forks started to vibrate at supersonic speed to produce a machine-like sound. Northern Moldavia family. The Winter Count, Beirut de Radcliffe's death has been certified. Danliela Radcliffe has submitted paperwork to inherit the Count's title. When the message stopped broadcasting, Mensk's eyes widened. He felt an intense killing aura behind him which sent a chill down his spine. Even though it was a brief moment, the coldness in the air was so intense, it felt like he was experiencing the fear of being attacked by a dragon. An eerie silence filled the room. After a short moment, the frost-killing intent subsided as Joshua calmed himself down. Well, what do you know? Isn't this just perfect? He spoke but in a volume that was so soft, no one could hear it. It's about D*MN time for me to return home. Chapter 4. Chapter 4, 3,197,481. Starfall year 831. Winter. 2nd of November. Northern Flatlands. Heavy snow. I've arrived. Joshua pulled back his hood and jumped down from his horse. Amidst the chilly winter's gale, he gazed towards the horizon and caressed the poor little beast that was nearly frozen to death. He then turned back towards the general direction of his intended destination and sighed. 17 days. After the shocking news of the death of the Winter Count, he had started his journey back home from the Northwest Plain and had taken 17 days to travel to where he was then. He then finally left the borders of the empire and entered his northern territory. His hometown. The place was entirely white, as the snow had blanketed the entire wasteland. Joshua pulled the horse's reins towards a nearby tree for a quick stop. He knelt down and plunged his hand into the snow. Judging from the snow's thickness, I'm sure that this is the first snowstorm. He pulled out his hands and noted the depth of the snow. Not too bad. This won't affect our speed. He got up and rubbed his hands to warm himself. Soon. Real soon. He took a deep breath and released a long breath that was immediately blown away by the cold northern wind. To take in the frigid air of the North's winter was nostalgic. The wind came from the highlands further up north. It carried the saltiness of the northern sea, of which Joshua felt at ease after inhaling a mouthful of it. Beirut de Radcliffe was Joshua's father. A headstrong middle-aged man with the will of steel. However, Joshua's memories of him were so scarce that he only remembered bits and pieces of the man he called father. Compared to the great leader of the territory, the people Joshua interacted with the most were the old butler at home and the family knights. His mother, however, had passed away long ago due to an incurable winter fever. It could be said that Joshua and his father were not close. Yet, even so, the news about his father's death had made his entire being burn with rage. It did not take long for him to calm down. Revenge. No, a man should not know such a word. Ever since he found out there was trouble stirring up in his territory, the possibility of such event happening had been on his mind. It was expected but still a shock to him when he knew of his father's death. To die in the line of duty is a warrior's greatest honor. Perhaps that old man did manage to achieve his dream. Still, death would always be a loss. Worse, it was his own relative. It made him irritable and angry. The thought of his death returned to him. It was a gloomy night sky when he was stabbed from behind by a blade of mercury in the middle of a battle in Fort Naya. A powerful curse seeped into his body and drained the energy from within his core. No matter from which angle one looked at, it was an unforgivable act of betrayal. Yet, someone made his appearance at the same time as his father's death, his uncle. He had made his appearance when Joshua was preoccupied and had taken the chance to claim the title of Count. Nonetheless to say, be it the unknown stabber, or his uncle, both were despicable traitors. As a traveler from another world, Joshua had a million ways to make himself stronger. As an ex-legendary warrior, a territory was considered something neither needed nor wanted. Given the option of becoming a territorial owner, he would rather be out in the wild traveling the world. It was something that he preferred. However, his situation was rather straightforward. He did not care about needing the territory or whether he was happy or not. All that mattered then was to find that sucker and beat the sh*t out of him. It's time to go. Joshua rested enough. The horse that was kneeling on the ground got up to its feet and neighed. Joshua pulled a handful of dried feed that was treated with alcohol. The strong war horse gobbled them just as fast as Joshua handed the food to it. As a powerful horse with the blood of a land drake, it drank alcohol and consumed meat. Joshua had been feeding him meat that came from the wild. The horse was good and had never let Joshua down. Its recovery speed was extremely fast. That explained why he had only taken 17 days to return to the north. Normal horses would have taken twice as long. Joshua mounted the horse, feeling extremely dissatisfied. Level 28 Upper Silver Tier. I'm too weak. If only I was Gold Tier, I would have been back home a long time ago. The game Continental War had a level tier system. Mortal, level 0 to 5. Steel, 6 to 15. Silver, 16 to 30. Gold, 31 to 50. Supreme, 51 to 75. Legendary, 76 to 105. Gold was a tier that separated the strong and the weak. Normally, an adult man would have the capabilities of a level 5 mortal. If he had received training and had served the army, he would be at the rank of steel. An elite soldier or an officer would be silver tier. While this concept could only be applied to the people of this world, players in the game had reached the peak of the silver tier in the first game version. As the game released more content in further expansions, the limits were raised higher. When the fourth expansion was released, strong players were able to achieve the highest tier, which was legendary, and would gain the ability to truly affect the game progress. Joshua was only a level 28 upper silver tier. He was merely a normal human being that could not exceed the limits of what humans could do. Under the limitation of the tier, regular running speed would exceed that of a horse, including even resting time. Additionally, the speed of slowest transportation called the Draconic Caravan was unknown. At the very least, land drakes could move all the time without resting. Their movements would not even be affected by any sort of terrain. Joshua, on the hand, was still traveling by horse. Sometimes even, he had to walk on his feet across tough terrains. There's no time left. Joshua suddenly recalled something. Right now, it's only the end of the first expansion, hence it is still peaceful. However, the second expansion marks the beginning of the dark tide. The demons would descend, followed by the gods that were chased out by the demons. The war would tear this world apart and the fighting and killing will never cease. That was only the first expansion, the third and fourth would be even worse. There would even be chaos demons coming down during the fourth expansion. Before coming into this world, Joshua was fighting them on the battlefield. Chaos demons, they were the strongest, and most ferocious race that he had ever come across. 24 years. If my calculations are correct, it will be another 24 years before the chaos demons descend. Sigh, 24 years might be long, but such a time would be over in a blink of an eye. Joshua pressed a finger to his temple. In about half a year later, the demons will come and the world will welcome a burst of power evolution. War across the continent will be elevated to another scale. If that were to happen, I alone wouldn't be enough to handle such a tragedy. It was true. Even though Joshua strongly believed that he could be stronger than he ever was, a one-man army would not be enough to deal with a demon army that attacked in a tsunami-like wave. He needed a team. A strong, powerful group of soldiers that could share his load. Moldavia would be his place to develop that requirement. Be it a battle team or hiring a private army, Moldavia would be his first place to invest his time. At that moment, Joshua was no longer the deputy commander in the far south that could control large groups of soldiers. He no longer had trustworthy comrades that could help him. Right then, he was alone. Even so, he would not let anything disrupt his life. Come gods or demons, or even another visitor from another world, he would thrive to protect the world. Nevertheless, the first on his to-do list was to find and end the life of his wretched uncle. After a short distance, Joshua spotted a road post that looked like a tower. He followed the signs on the post and came to a long stone pavement that was built all the way towards the main city of Moldavia. Go. Hearing the command, the horse started galloping at full speed even when there was a layer of ice covering the ground. The cold white clouds rolled in from the south and had cast a shadow that enveloped all the land in the wasteland mountain ridges. Snowflakes, the size of an adult's palm, were falling down as if they were dancing in the air. Despite the heavy snowfall that would obscure one's vision, there were many groups of merchants walking on the pavement. The pavement was made huge enough to allow a large group of 10 men or more to walk side by side. The merchants were walking in two directions, some were going towards the city and some were leaving on the draconic caravans. This mode of transport was important for trading among the 4 territories in the north. Before the invention of airships, these beasts were the only way to transport goods. Finally, some humans. Joshua sighed with relief when he saw such a scene. It was not that he had not seen any humans during his 17 days of traveling alone, but the fact that after he had entered the northern region, he had yet to spot a single human. During normal circumstances, besides adventurers and explorers, humans would never travel far from the main city. Danger awaited in the wasteland, forest, cavern, since there were countless of monsters that lurked and hunted. A single mishap would spell doom for anyone. Speaking of dangerous events, there's even the dark tide of the dark forest that happened once or twice annually. The dark forest and dark tide were the 2 worst problems that all races with power would face throughout the Themyscroft continent. The Empire's territory was huge, it in fact covered the entire northern region of the continent. The northern territory extended up to the Starfall Ocean. The southern region borders up to the center of the continent. If it was not for the constant issue of the dark forest and the dark tide, the Empire's expansion would have reached far and fast enough that they would have already been at war with the southern kingdom. Excuse me. The one riding the horse alone. Joshua was riding his horse on the stone pavement at a leisurely speed when someone had called out to him. He turned to the source of the voice and saw a group of merchants that were preparing to leave the city. A middle-aged man came out of the wagon and greeted him loudly. His face expressed extreme fatigue. Are you perhaps heading towards Moldavia? Yes, I am. Joshua came to a stop and approached the wagon. What I can do you for, good sir? Heed this old man's advice. Leave the city. You're better off elsewhere, said the man with a deep and hoarse voice. Why is that? Joshua asked with great interest. The man had a scar that stretched all the way from his chin to his neck. It looked like it was from a cut. A snowstorm is coming and the dark tide is coming. Many of the city's guards have been assigned to the fortress to strengthen the defenses. I can tell that there will be chaos since a large number of unknown knights came in half a month ago. I'm not boasting. Please heed my words. We, the merchants, have been traveling for many years, some of us had even met with the ruler of the city. When we say that we have never seen the knights before, they must be coming from somewhere that is not on the map. The citizens of the city are in a state of panic. I am guessing something big is about to happen, hence our departure. The man gave Joshua a stern look and continued his lecture. I only warned you about this because you are traveling alone. If there's no urgent business to tend to, I urge you to turn around. There's just too much suspicion in the air now. I heard that even the famous wandering fighters were recruited to join the defense and have started patrolling the city grounds. All the old-timers on the streets are nowhere to be seen anymore. I'm afraid that my suspicion will soon prove right. Something big is coming. Whatever it is, it's not going to be good. The man had a keen sense of judgment and good observation. That and the man himself was kind enough to give Joshua his advice. That advice made Joshua think about it for a moment before he realized the reason behind it. Half a month ago was the period when his father's death was confirmed. Many of the higher-ranked officers would know about it, yet it was not spread to the rest of the common folk. As for the dark tide, it was about high time for it to come. Having knights around to defend the city would be the most common thing to do. On the other hand, about the large number of unknown knights, they were most probably brought in by his uncle. It was most likely preparation to claim the count's title. If that were the case, most of the people living in the city then would be his men. There was something odd. Joshua may not know much about his uncle, yet he was sure that hiring a group of knights, or even just a knight, would be beyond his capabilities. Theirs was no way he could pull that off just by being a merchant. "Thank you," said Joshua as he nodded earnestly towards the middle-aged man. He lifted his head and smiled. "I'll be frank, you need not be in a hurry to leave. I could tell from the footprints in the snow that your wagon is carrying a heavy load. Perhaps you have not made a good sale? Then again, I'd urge you to wait a few days. I'm sure you can expect an unexpected news and sales. Farewell." Joshua turned his horse around and sped off without waiting for the man to reply. Sigh. Youngsters these days. Being hot-headed will get you nowhere. I told him that place is dangerous. Why isn't he listening to my advice? Wait a minute. The man frowned while brushing his unkempt beard as he tried his best to remember something. That man. He seems all too familiar. Could it be? The man raised his head only to find that Joshua was a great distance away from him. Could it be him? Dark forest. Dark tide. I'm sure that it's about time for that to come. Talk about timing. That old geezer sure know how to grasp attention. One dead and another comes to claim.